Lucy Letby was born in 1990 in the small town of Hereford, England. Her birth had complications and she required intensive care in the hospital. She credits the nurses at the hospital for saving her life in her very first days. Based on this experience, she wanted to become a neonatal nurse herself so she could save babies just like she herself was saved. She went to nursing school and in 2012 became a registered nurse in the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Letby was well liked by her colleagues and even took part in fundraising campaigns to raise money for the hospital. In 2015, she gained the necessary qualifications to work in the neonatal intensive care unit. This is where babies with birth complications go. Almost immediately after she joined, some of her colleagues started to notice an unusual number of suspicious deaths. It's not unusual for babies to die in intensive care. These are babies with severe birth complications. Despite the best efforts of the doctors and nurses, some of them can't be saved. At the Countess of Chester Hospital in particular, they usually had 2 or 3 such deaths per year. But in the first 2 months after Letby joined the unit, there were 4 deaths. What was even more suspicious is that the doctors could not immediately determine the cause of death, which is highly unusual. Preliminary investigations immediately pointed to Letby. Of all of the doctors and nurses on staff, she was the only person who was present during all of the deaths. In June of 2016, about 1 year after the suspicious deaths began, Letby was suspended by the hospital and the police began an investigation. The local police had never investigated a case like this before. They lacked the expertise to determine if an infant death was natural or the result of deliberate harm. They spent the better part of the next 2 years consulting with medical professionals and finally came to the conclusion that these deaths could not have been natural. In 2018, they arrested Letby and brought her in for questioning. At this point, the only thing they knew were that the babies were most likely murdered, and Letby was the only staff member whose working shifts coincided with every single suspicious death. But they lacked any smoking gun evidence to charge her with murder, so they were forced to release her on bail. Throughout 2019 and 2020, police secured warrants to search her home multiple times, collecting thousands of items of potential evidence. They found multiple diaries with thousands of pages of handwritten notes. As investigators read through the pages, they started to develop a disturbing picture of what was going on in Letby's mind. In one entry she wrote, "I really can't do this anymore, and I am a problem to those who know me, and it would be much easier for everyone if I just went away." She appeared to be referring to the suspicions amongst the hospital staff whilst the investigation was ongoing. In another entry, she wrote the word help in bold, as well as I hate my life. In another entry, she wrote the word hate in bold. She also wrote desperate, panic, fear, lost, and why me? And, most damning of all, she wrote, I am evil, I did this. Investigators also found numerous confidential medical records about the dead babies in her home. In 2020, Letby was arrested again and finally charged with 7 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. Some of the babies who survived suffered brain damage or other injuries, which will likely stay with them for the rest of their lives. Subsequent investigation revealed a shocking level of sophistication and premeditation. She used multiple different methods, including injecting insulin, overfeeding, injecting too much oxygen into their bloodstream, and even physically assaulting them. In some cases, the baby would survive her initial attempt, so she would try again a few days later. She waited until her colleagues were on breaks, so she was alone with the babies. The rationale for her diverse methods of killing was to make it more plausible that the deaths were unrelated accidents. She also falsified medical reports to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before the death occurred, which would make it look like the deaths were natural. After the deaths, she would also search on Facebook and other social media about the baby's parents. She wanted to understand the families. In 2023, Letby was convicted on 7 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One thing to note about the Lucy Letby case is its shocking similarity to another case of a serial killer within the English healthcare system. In the 1980s and 90s, Dr. Harold Shipman killed over 200 elderly patients by injecting them with lethal amounts of diamorphine, a powerful painkiller. When Shipman was a teenager, his mother died under very similar circumstances. She was terminally ill and doctors prescribed her powerful painkillers for the last months of her life. In his twisted mind, he was replaying the death of his mother over and over again. Lucy Letby has never admitted guilt and never given a motive for her crimes, but we know she herself suffered from birth complications. The babies she murdered were in a similar position to herself when she was at their age, in an intensive care unit reliant on doctors and nurses to save them. She appeared to have moral qualms about what she was doing, even going so far as to call herself evil in her diary and say the world would be better off without her. But one key difference between Shipman and Letby is that Shipman's mother died. Despite having birth complications, Letby survived. This makes her motivations even more difficult to understand. Perhaps she just wanted to kill, and the vulnerable babies in her care happened to be the easiest targets.